Have you ever learned something by actually doing it instead of just listening to a lecture? Well, you've got this guy to thank. Today, we're digging into the life and ideas of the architect of the modern classroom, John Dewey. His philosophy is so baked into our world, you might not even realize you're living in the house he designed.
So, that's the big question for us today, right? How did one philosopher manage to completely turn the modern classroom on its head? The answer, as you'll see, is an incredible story of principle, a bit of controversy, and a truly revolutionary idea about how we learn. To get how he changed the classroom, first we got to understand that his blueprint was way bigger than just schools. See, Dewey wasn't just an education guy, he was a full-blown architect of how we think today. He was a giant in a school of thought called pragmatism. And what made Dewey so different is that he didn't just keep his ideas locked away in some armchair. Nope. He dragged philosophy out of the ivory tower and put it to work in the real world. In doing so, he changed how we see the mind, morality, and of course, education itself. But here's the thing. His ideas didn't just appear out of thin air in some academic lab. To really get Dewey's philosophy, you have to get to know the man himself. Because for him, principles weren't just theories. They were forged in the fire of his own life. Our story really kicks off back in 1884 at the University of Michigan. A young John Dewey shows up to teach, and in one of his classes is a student named Alice Chipman. She was sharp, progressive, and really passionate about social problems and education. Well, they fell in love, and her fire lit his. She's the one who really focused his brilliant mind on using psychology and philosophy to tackle the real-world problems in education. And that commitment to acting on his beliefs, it was about to be put to the ultimate test. Okay, picture this. It's 1906. Dewey's just landed a big new job at Columbia University. The famous Russian writer Maxim Gorky is visiting the US. But then, bam, a scandal explodes. The press finds out the woman he's traveling with isn't his wife. Overnight, Gorky becomes a social pariah, thrown out of his hotel, with absolutely nowhere to go. So the Deweys had a choice. Do they cave to public outrage, or do they live by their principles? They chose their principles. They invited Gorky to stay in their own home, putting Dewey's brand new, prestigious career on the line. And just listen to what his wife Alice said. This quote says it all. The stakes were sky high. They were literally willing to lose everything for what they believed in. And that moment right there, it just perfectly illustrates the heart of Dewey's philosophy. For him, ethics weren't just ideas to talk about. They were principles you had to live, things you had to do, even when it cost you. This idea of principle in action is the key to understanding everything he did next. So how does this commitment to action become a whole philosophy? Well, it all boils down to one simple, incredibly powerful idea: experience. Dewey was a pragmatist. So for pragmatists, an idea isn't true just because it's a perfect picture of reality. An idea is valuable if it works, if it's a useful tool that helps us navigate the world and solve problems. Don't think of ideas as photographs. Think of them as tools, like a hammer, a map, or a blueprint. Okay, now this chart might look a little intense, but it's showing something really cool. It's basically a map of Dewey's brain. Over on the left, you've got his work on psychology, how our minds work. On the right, his work on ethics, how we ought to act. Now follow those arrows down. See how they both flow into one point at the bottom? That's his famous essay, My Pedagogic Creed. This is the exact moment his philosophy of mind and his philosophy of action fused together to become a blueprint for education. And at the heart of it all is the single most important idea in Dewey's educational universe. He said learning isn't about filling up an empty brain with facts. No, it's the reconstruction of experience. It's a cycle, right? We do something, we think about what happened, and we use that insight to change how we see the world and what we do next. So let's see how this one powerful idea about experience led Dewey to completely reinvent two massive fields. First, our whole concept of the mind, and second, the actual design of a school. Before Dewey, the common wisdom was that the mind was passive, like a blank slate or a piece of wax that the world just stamps impressions onto. Dewey comes along and flips the whole table. He says, no way. The mind is an active biological tool. It evolved over millions of years, not to be a spectator, but to be a problem solver, an instrument for our survival.
And listen, this wasn't some minor academic squabble. His paper on the reflex arc in 1896 was a bombshell. It was so revolutionary that it's credited with creating an entirely new school of thought, functionalist psychology. It was the very first uniquely American approach to the science of the mind. So, if the mind is an active tool designed for problem solving, what on earth does that mean for school? Well, it means the old way of doing things is completely backward. The traditional school was all about the teacher, with students just sitting there passively soaking up facts. Dewey School? It's all about the child. It's a place where kids learn by doing, by getting their hands dirty and tackling problems that actually mean something to them.
I mean, you really can't overstate how massive this change in thinking was. People literally called it the Copernican revolution in education. You know, just like Copernicus reordered the entire solar system by putting the sun at the center instead of the earth, Dewey reordered the classroom by moving the teacher out of the center and putting the child there instead. So what does this actually look like? Dewey broke it down into a pretty simple three-step process. First, you start by doing. Get students involved in something real, like gardening or building something. Then, step 2, knowledge comes next. You don't just memorize random facts, you go find information because you need it to solve a problem that popped up in your activity. And finally, step 3, that's how real thinking gets built. Skills like planning and predicting. They're not abstract ideas, they're muscles you develop through actual practice. And what's absolutely incredible is that this blueprint, it doesn't sound like it's from the 1890s. It sounds like something from a TED Talk about the future of education. And that's because Dewey's ideas are, maybe now more than ever, incredibly relevant. I mean, just think about your own school experience. If you ever did a group project, or built a model for science class, or took part in a debate, if you were ever in a classroom that valued hands-on work instead of just endless lectures, you've experienced the living legacy of John Dewey. Seriously, his intellectual DNA is everywhere. Project-based learning, that's Dewey. The phrase learning by doing, that's Dewey. The massive emphasis on critical thinking, you guessed it. Even cutting-edge ideas like social-emotional learning or the very idea that school has a social purpose, it all traces right back to him. And that brings us to his final, most important point. For John Dewey, the ultimate goal wasn't just to make good students, it was to create good citizens. He believed that when students learn to work together, to solve problems, and to think for themselves, they're actually practicing the skills of democracy. He saw schools as little laboratories for democracy itself. Which leaves us with a pretty big question to think about. Today, are they?